Technical Director Jordan Ferrell.
Jordan, another offseason, another lot of additions. Talk about your philosophies with roster building this offseason.
Yeah, it was. It was great to have Noah, the staff, carry over from year to year. I think that makes a big difference, obviously, in your planning, what you're doing with the players at the end of the season, and then in your recruitment as we move towards the season. So you'll see the squad size isn't large, so for us, versatility is always key. And we have kind of kept that with players who we know can play in 2, maybe even 3 positions as a priority. We obviously had to try to replace Othar's goals. That's kind of first and foremost. And I think the approach, with Pelaez wasn't just this guy's going to replace 19 goals, but can we find somebody who can also promote goal scoring from others? I think last year was not necessarily the season that we wanted from players like Johnny or players like Lindo. And so some of the conversations in the offseason were, what do we need to do for them through the preseason, into the season, to be able to get a few goals from a couple different places as opposed to one player. I feel like we did that. We also knew that we needed to reduce the average age. That was a really high priority. So we had an average age last year that was 27 plus, and now we're 25 and a half, which is a real high priority. We wanted to take from kind of that older age group. We only wanted to finish the roster with around 4 or 5 that were in that 29 plus age bracket. We wanted to get a lot more of the roster into that peak age, 24 to 28. And then we also wanted to start getting more of these U23s in. It's a way forward for us, not only with players like Trayvon, who represent high potential talent coming out of a market like Jamaica, but we also wanted to start to really utilize Project 510, so a player like Danny Gomez or Ryan Hurt, who was in training with 510 in the first team all throughout 2021 in the summertime. Those are players that we knew really well from being in our system, and we feel like they have bright futures. So those kind of the clarity on what we were looking for in terms of age brackets, experience throughout the squad was a real high priority going into the offseason.
Can you talk about how the front office has evolved this last year? Obviously, you and I talked about how that is closing business for the first window. So yeah, what has that been like? Yeah,
it's been really awesome to see him take the reins on that. My role is consistently evolving as the club evolves. Previously, we only really had a first team in 21. That was all my focus. And we got going with Project 510 in 21. In 22, it became a much bigger process for us, the second team process, the relationship with the youth landscape in Northern California. And this year we start Seoul. And so Nana has been growing from captain to assistant coach to director of player personnel, where I think this offseason he really drove the recruitment process. So everything, all of our collaborative conversations flow through him, and that's ensured that we get some of these deals over the line. Some of his relationships, some of his experiences as a player are really beneficial for us in that process, but also to have somebody who's really focused day in and day out on who we're bringing in, how players are exiting as alum as well, and what the structure of all of that kind of looks like. His fingers on the pulse of it directly. His conversations are there to be had. He's not caught up in something else. And I think he's done really well. The roster I think we're very happy with. We know that there's going to be still some moves to make, but that's now his main focus, and I think that shows the evolution of our organization as well.
So we just get a quick update on how the Soul is coming along, in terms of building out that team.
Yeah, so you'll hear head coach announcement here relatively soon. She's in market. We've been working on building the roster and getting those pieces. For Seoul, it's very clear our intention is to be professional within the USL landscape. The Super League that's imminent is perfect opportunity for us to do that. So the makeup of the W League roster will reflect that intention, meaning we're not going to go for a bunch of 30-year-olds to try to win the W League. but we would rather have a bunch of 18-year-olds to try to win the W League or 17-year-olds to try to win the W League, because in a year, 2 years' time, when we transition into the professional ranks, we will have young talents that we have already built a relationship with. They understand our philosophy, they understand our way of doing things, and that bodes well for us heading in that direction. So that process is going right now. 2 members of the Project 510 staff will do double duty. So our goalkeeper coach, Sergio Valle, and our performance coach, David Cordova, will both be in the same roles for Seoul as well, because I think that will help the coaching staff, the players, all kind of settle in a lot faster. They have an understanding of the way of doing things. They're very familiar with the space, the process, all those things, and I think that helps everybody hit the ground running.
Can you elaborate on the talent pool you're looking to pull from for Seoul, college kids, club kids, things like that?
Both, yep. We know that, the Division I calendar from a women's soccer timeline is challenging. The players aren't available until oftentimes the middle of May, if not the end of May, after their spring and after their semester finishes. And then there's a July 1, report date for Division I. So we have to deal with that. We also, as I was mentioning, we want the younger players to get an opportunity to be showcased, and for us to start to get a feel for them as people and as players. So that's a really high priority. We have some incredible clubs and organizations around the Bay Area that have done great work. MVLA, Mustang are 2 that don't have W League components. Obviously, you've seen some of the FC Bay Area relationship with staff members at SF Glenn's. But there's a ton of talent out there. There's a national team player at La Miranda. There's a couple other players that we've seen around that are headed to SEC schools, headed to Pac-12 schools, really top players that are 17, 18 years old. And I think for us, they can be as good as any if given the opportunity. So we know that we have to deal with those couple things: the timeline of the season in relation to college, but also our desire to push youth players in. And as we've seen with even Project 510, we can't just put a whole team of youngsters out there and expect to compete. We are in the business of winning, so it's not like we're just trying to play players and see. We do want to also have some, we'll call them post-college players, that I think provide some stability, different life experiences, different stage, etc. And I think that's going to be a really important dynamic to get right.
Jordan, it was kind of put in a difficult position in a season, was successful, and got you guys into the playoffs. So in the offseason, how did the coaching search go? Was he always the first choice, or did you kind of do a full search? What was that?
We did a full search, yeah, that's for sure. And I think that, it's always easier for the person who's in the chair to show they have the quality to stay there. So he was a bit lucky in getting the interim. I mean, it wasn't really too much of a conversation when everything happened and he stepped into the interim role. I've obviously known Noah for quite some time. He knows the organization really well. He's seen how everything's evolved. But we did go through a full search, and I think there were some very good candidates that we certainly had a lot of conversations about how it worked. People with USL experience, people with experiences above USL or outside of the United States that always beg the question about what the right fit is. Everybody says it's the best coach. I don't know. I would say the best coach is the best fit, right? Because somebody who could be extremely of a high level and quality tactically might not understand the dynamics of the USL Championship. Traveling to the East Coast and 3 time zones, a couple thousand miles, that's a big difference than if you've only worked in Italy or Spain and it's a very short trip. So there's those types of things, plus the direction that we want to go, as I was mentioning earlier with the roster. Noah ended up being somebody who had experience in developing youth talent. He's also worked as an assistant coach at a really high level in terms of Olympic qualifier or World Cup qualifiers and with the national team of El Salvador. He has internal experience working with us. Himself as a player, he understands what it's like to sit in the locker room. And I think at the end of the day, we felt really comfortable with the direction everything was headed. And that, along with what we feel like is his potential as a coach, made it a good decision on our side of things to pull the interim tag. We feel like he'll provide some stability. He's obviously from the East Bay, so I think that's another piece. We always put localness as one contributing factor in our decision. Even in our filter, we, our all of our jobs, we search and we say, okay, what is their localness? What is, some of these other key criteria? And nothing better than to have somebody who grew up driving the 880 and 580, playing soccer, working every day, trying to represent that.
And just following up on the new team you're kind of building, you say you wanted to be younger. Like, what really kind of was the reason for that being younger? Is it just to get players more in the prime, or to be more of a development? What is the reason, particularly
to win championships? It's 100% the reason why we're here, is to win championships. And I think the way of going about it can be done differently in a lot of different places. For us, it is, we're not going to be the biggest spenders. It's just not the way that we're going to achieve that. So you have to find players before they blow up, right? And you have to be the place where a player can come to realize their potential. You have to understand where that puts you kind of in the pyramid and in the pecking order. If you need a certain amount of veteran stability, and I think that veteran stability is both those over 29 players, the Tariks, the Emras, the Jojos, Pelayas, what they bring to the team and their experience and their careers. But also, Cozy's experience, having been in the MLS and loaned out the last 2 years, that he comes to the table with a lot of maybe the desire to prove himself in a way that he hasn't been able to in the last few years. He's still within that peak age. And I think those two age brackets are the two that, when we talk about winning championships, they're the ones that are going to carry a lot of the weight of the season. But we also, the global marketplace is shifting, right? And you're seeing a lot of value placed on that under 23 level of talent. We also, in trying to fulfill our values and our principles in terms of local players, Emra is one example of a local player. Paul is one example of a local player. But we also feel like we could be a place where local players find their way onto the field to kickstart their professional career. Drew and Ethan are representative of that. They're young players that have done really, really well coming through the youth ranks around the Bay Area, and now they're getting their start in professional soccer here at the Roots, and that's something that we want to be very clear to others around, that we will play players like that. We will bring players into our ranks, and more than that, I think there's a return on that investment that is important for us in terms of sustainable business practice moving forward.
Just with regards to that global marketplace, it feels like this is a somewhat new situation in terms of the reality of that. You've got players from local academies who come to you, but when you can join, it feels like this season. Then you've got the kids coming up from private group. Someone in your position, how exciting is that? And then how happy would you be to feel to see kids like them put down their first professional steps here and go into that hopefully next step in time?
No, I think the only thing that would make me happier is to see a team that had a number of those players win a championship here, right? I think that side of things is something that's a really high priority for us. The mix of local and global is how we feel like we can best represent what Oakland is, right? People who are born and raised here, and people who have found home here, being born and raised elsewhere. But also we know that there's a ton of talent here in the Bay Area, the East Bay itself, that has traditionally gone elsewhere to navigate their route to professional football, and in addition overseas. So for us, that isn't something that we hope happens. It's something that we're being very intentional about how we set up our process, how we build relationships to be able to make it happen. We had about 6 Project 510 players in preseason with the first team. That's not including the Gomez's of the world and others. Actually 7, let me rephrase that. So, last year when Tim made his debut for the first team, I think we were all very excited to see somebody who has kind of navigated relationships of ours into 510 and into the first team. But I think we're seeing that start to churn because we have more talent and quality in Project 510 now than we did previously. And so, at a certain point, they're knocking on the first team door saying, hey, I can be better than that guy. But they have good role models in the first team of what it takes to be a top player at the USL Championship level. And I think it's a statement of intent for us to go after teenagers that we feel like can transition into the first team. And, college is, I think the flexibility of education has been, of quality education, post-COVID is a different reality than it was pre-COVID. And so that's always kind of the question that people have. And we're seeing this now. We're making these statements. We're building this process. But also we're going to be headed in that same direction when it comes to Seoul, because there is an equal amount of women's soccer players with high potential in this neck of the woods. And we want to make sure that we build process. We want to make sure that we build environment that allows them to flourish, find their way into the professional environment. And our real hope is that we help them navigate the first steps of their career here and beyond here as well.